You are among the first group of girls in your Muslim community to go away from home.
My great grandfather thought, I'm going to send my girls to school too. It was quite a shock to my father when I said, I want to go to Peradeniya. My mother never wore burqa. She didn't. I never wore anything like that. One of the most valuable things in the Muslim community is their connection. They're so oriented towards connection. Loneliness and isolation is terrible for people with mental illness. It makes it worse.
Today on this Boston Lanka program, we are joining with Yasmin Azad. She's joining from Boston. And Yasmin, we are so happy to have you in our program. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Chitra.
Yeah. Yasmin, we can talk a little bit about your background and where you're coming from. Obviously, you are originally from Sri Lanka, and you have all kinds of experiences growing up in Gaul and in a traditional Muslim family, I guess. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. And then my understanding is you are going to share you, your story. I mean, obviously, you are a good storyteller. You have written a book as well. So, these voices, the voices of South Asians living in Boston, living around Boston area, it's an organization, I think, trying to encourage Asian Americans, especially South Asian Americans, to bring their voices to the forefront and share. Tell us a little bit about these voices, this organization, as well as how you want to be participating in this event.
Right. So the Voices, this program is an annual program what happens is that the South Asians from Pakistan, India, even Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, this is the first time that Sri Lanka is being represented. We tell our stories so that we can, as immigrants, we have stories, right? We've come from one place to another. And we want to share those with people so that the American public at large, but even fellow immigrants will have a sense of, commonality. This is what we go through when we come from one culture to another. And so it's a way of, many sort of culture, what shall I say, minorities, they get, they get heard, right? Whether it's African American minority or Mexican or the Latin American. But I think there's a feeling, or at least I have a feeling, that the South Asian and stories don't get heard as much as they should. So this is a good opportunity to do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
The story I tell is, and I won't tell the whole story because that would, spoil it for those who are coming.
Right.
But one of the things that I recognized as an immigrant, and I recognize this this is something I write about in my book. So when you go to another culture, it's not only that you begin to learn things about that culture, right? It's not like I came from Sri Lanka to America and learned a lot about American culture. In the process of learning about American culture, I also got to understand my own culture a little bit more carefully. Because I think the thing is, you have to get away from something to really see it, right? When you're embedded in a culture, you don't see it. So this is what I saw. And my story that I'm going to share on Saturday and Sunday is called The Man with Glasses. And it's a story that takes place about almost 20 years ago when people were actually subscribing to newspapers. So it was a day I didn't have to go to work. I sat down with a cup of tea and I opened out the Boston Globe. And on the front page was a big picture of a prisoner who had escaped jail and was being taken back to jail. And there was a law enforcement officer near him. And the prisoner was looking straight into the camera, so I got a good look at his face. And the first thought that popped into my mind was, he doesn't look like somebody who goes to jail. And, once we are in America, you get more sensitized to stereotyping and discrimination, right? At least I was. So I stopped short and I thought, now, why do I think like that? Why do I think this person is not the kind of person who goes to jail? And I thought about it for some time and then I figured out he was wearing glasses. And in Sri Lanka, where we come from, hardly anyone wears glasses who's not middle class. Poor people, unfortunately, don't have the resources to go to eye doctors and certainly not the money to buy glasses. So I, somewhere in my process of, as a child and a young adult in Sri Lanka, I had absorbed this thought that middle class people usually don't go to jail, that it's only the poorer people who go to jail. So and also I had this thought that if you wore glasses, you were probably a professor or a doctor or a lawyer, somebody like that. And that's why I came to that conclusion. It was instant, but it sort of told me, what's called implicit bias. We all have it, right? I don't think any one of us can say. And some of the implicit biases we have in Sri Lanka. And what I'm going to share also in my story hour is that in Sri Lanka, though we have ethnicities, we don't have, we all look alike basically, don't you? I think, right? Basically. So it's not as though, like here, you would look at a person and say, oh, he's white, he's African American. We don't do that. Mostly, I think for me, and for most people, one of our instant reactions is he's either, westernized and, from the middle class, or he's poor and he's not westernized. That's the instant categorization that we do most of the time in Sri Lanka. So that's the categorization that I had carried with me. And I came to realize, this is something I have to, recognize and work. And there's another part, the story continues. For that, you'll have to come to and listen. Do you
Okay.
have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I understand, especially coming from one culture, another culture. I think, especially, I'm myself also first
Yeah.
immigrant, first generation immigrant. So, I think we live both in both cultures in a way, right? I
Mhm.
think one foot in one culture. So, I think it's tough, and I think, especially maybe our children probably will have a different experience. They are probably uh, growing up in this culture. But I want to get back to your, I think, younger days probably, because I
Mm-hmm.
know that, you know, living in Gaul,
Yes.
Fort area, and then probably in a very traditional family. I know you are among the first group of girls in your Muslim community to go away from home to pursue a university degree. I mean, nowadays we don't think, oh, it's a big deal, but tell us that. I mean, as a young person, uh,
Sure.
what's that experience like?
Right. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a background. So the Gaul fort, if you have ever been there, is like, you have this fortress and you have 1,000 people living in that. And when I was growing up, it was mostly burghers, because it's a fortress, right? And the majority were Muslims. And what happened is that, like this, my story in my book, Stay Daughter, it begins with my great grandfather. My great grandfather had neighbors who were burghers, right? And they became friends. You know how you're next door to each other. Golf fort houses, there's no gardens in between, you just share a wall. And through that, and also my great grandfather, because Galle Fort was like the main harbor before it was moved to Colombo. He was what's called a ship chandler, which means that when the ships came to the harbors, he was the one who was providing rope and, like coal and all that, water maybe. So he got to know these Europeans and the burghers, and they had an influence on him, which is that they got, they were sending their children to school, the girls to school, and my great grandfather thought, I'm going to send my girls to school too, which was a revolutionary thing. This was like in the 1860s. It was a huge thing because no Muslim girl had gone to school. I'm not talking about university, I'm talking about school.
Right.
And my great aunt, that means his daughter, was the first Muslim girl to go to school in Gaul, I think, in the whole island. And she was, so we had a tradition in the family of being a little bit more westernized. So so when it came to my, but even then, when I was growing up, Muslim girls never went to school beyond the 10th grade or most at the 12th grade. So it was quite a shock to my father when I said, I want to go to Peradeniya. And he said, what? To go to Peradeniya. But that's in the book. So finally he allowed me and I went. But what happened there, and why I tell my story is actually not because it's my story. I'm not more important than anybody else. What I wanted to explore was what is the impact of education on a group of people, on women who never had, who's never had a tradition of being educated. What does it do? And it has done a lot, I think. If you think of, like the Muslim girls now, all of them go to, not all, but quite a few of them go to universities. They have higher, especially in the urban areas. And what has happened in the whole Muslim world, even if you take Saudi Arabia, all those Muslim world, is when women's role changes, all of society changes. You can see that even in the United States after the women's movement, right? When women go out to work, you can't have half the population have such tremendous change. And what has happened, so I'm going to jump ahead. So I don't know, Chitral, if you remember, if you ever go to Sri Lanka now, you see Muslim women in wearing burqas, right? The black. I bet you never saw that when you were growing up in Sri Lanka, that you never even saw one, right? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So one of the things that inspired me or, to write the book is my mother never wore burqa. She didn't. I never wore anything like that. And I had a question, why has it come back? Why has this thing that, usually it goes the other way, right? You become more and more westernized and you become, that didn't, this, and that, and for me, in exploring that question, I'm not saying that this is the answer, but one of the things I think happened is it's sort of like a backlash. Because when Muslim girls go out to work and go, the divorce rate has skyrocketed in all Muslim countries. There are more intercommunal marriages, more Muslims, not a lot, but they are much more likely, there are many more have married outside the communities. And all this is very frightening to traditional people. And I think that whole movement towards going back to the burqa and headscarf and all that is kind of like the community trying to deal with these changes.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I think the challenge is to find that balance sometimes.
Yes,
And
yes,
sometimes even we see in US, I think, for
yes,
example, in terms of this pro-life and pro-choice,
yeah,
that type of thing, sometimes we go backwards. I mean,
yeah,
anyway, that's going to be a tough one. But I also want to know, like now, you not only you went to Peradeniya, one of the first
right.
few women students, but then
Yeah,
you became a lecturer and then you started teaching at California
yeah.
University. How was the like you were accepted as a scholar or a teacher in your community when you became a lecturer?
Actually, my father had a huge, going to Peradeniya was bad enough. But when I asked to go to work, he was stunned because, to him, like he's a very traditional because he didn't have much education. And for him, the whole idea of women working outside the home and actually earning money was like, isn't that almost like a dishonorable thing to do? We never make our women. So that was there. Though it's not there, I would say it's almost gone now. All the Muslim girls, not all, but those who have education can go and work. But so it was another change, that women go out. The most that Muslim girls did when I was growing up was they were school teachers.
Right.
That was sort of acceptable to go to school, to be a school teacher. But beyond that, especially like working in an office and things, was unheard of. So even that, so I was there like for about 3 4 years, so that was another challenge too. But gradually I think what we did is like, the community, things changed. Each one of us that got a university degree or went to train or went to work was like paving the way for others. But Chitral, I'm so glad you mentioned the word balance. If you don't mind, I want to say something. So, I, one of the things that because as a mental health counselor, and I'm sure in your profession, in your vocation too, is I saw also after I came here, what was very valuable about the Muslim community. So it's not just that I'm not trying to say that there was only negative for women. And one of the most valuable things in the Muslim community is their connection. They're so oriented towards connection and belonging, and they support each other very hard. The families, like not just the nuclear family, but the extended family. So when I started working here as a mental health counselor, one of the first things you confront is how isolated people are. How lonely and isolated people are. And loneliness and isolation is terrible for people with mental illness. It makes it worse. It it makes them more depressed. There's more suicide. And, so that was another reason why, as I said, when you come here, you not only see what's going on, in this new culture, you begin to see the culture you have left in a different way. And I began to appreciate the connective part of Muslim culture, how connected they are in a I would say in a new way. And I thought, wow, this, and we shouldn't lose this entirely. We should have a balance. Because if you take the modern way of life, we know it's not working for everybody. We know that it comes with a lot of problems. So, so it's a question, I know, how to maintain all the good that is in traditional life while also sort of taking what is modern and absorbing that too into your life.
Right. I mean, to like stay connected to your roots, and then I to be open to changes as well. Once you
Right, right. And also helping each other, sharing, all that is very rooted in our traditional cultures, right?
right,
Western culture, modern culture is very oriented towards independence and creativity, which is very good because we have a good life. I think we are oriented a lot towards connection and helping and sharing. And for me, ideally, maybe if we can have a balance between the two.
right. So I think you write this about this experience. This is more like your coming of age memoir, the
Mhm.
book.
Yes, yes, yes,
Stay the daughter
yes,
book.
yes.
I think it's an award-winning book. I think I will encourage people to read this if they haven't done it.
Thank you.
So so I'm interested, like coming from not only from Sri Lanka but very traditional background,
Yes,
and then you're
yes,
coming to this Western world, all kinds of changes, differences,
yes.
and new freedom. Uh,
Right.
how would you kind of cope in that, or how would you, engage in that kind of a freedom, trying to uh, stay true to your traditions, to your
Yes.
customs, and all that?
So, when I came, I was married. I had already married. So, it wasn't like, it might have been different if I were not. But I'll tell you, Chitral, one thing, and I think it might be true for you and for a lot of parents, the culture clash, I was most aware of it when I was raising my children. Because you want to raise your children with certain of your own values too, right? I did. But I also realized that they went to school, they had neighbors, friends whose cultural values were not the same. And it's always like, you know, how much of my old culture should I impose on them? How much freedom to give? And I think it maybe even like I'll give you a small specific example. So when my mother came to visit, there was no question if there was no room, one of my children will give up their bedroom to their grandmother, right? And share. That's taken for granted in our culture, but I realize it's not taken for granted in this culture. Uh, I'm not disparaging. I'm saying, a culture, but what I'm saying is, can those kinds of things like, or you eat when you serve food and you say company first. You can't eat first. You have to give that's not necessarily, so it's in the small things and the big things. And you know it was, I don't know, now they're grown, my children are grown, but still, I think as a parent was when I first really, really sort of had to struggle with what about how am I going to blend these two cultures.
Yeah,
I would be very interested in knowing whether that was so for you, Chitra.
yeah, definitely. I mean, we struggle with there are certain values that we want to protect, we cherish,
Yes,
but then also we want our children to look differently, to grow
yes,
up and have more wider outlook. Or obviously, they have a better knowledge, they have better ways to do things nowadays. But yeah, you're right. I think there's some of these values that you're talking about. I think those are very important for us and for our traditions, our culture.
right.
Yasmin, one final question before we end. Now, I know today we have a new generation, obviously,
Yes,
even in Sri Lanka, even in the Muslim community,
yes, yes.
I see a lot of new uh, books have come up, a lot of poetry, I mean, all kinds of different things. And there's a lot of radical ideas are there. I mean, I think not only in the Muslim community, but all over in Sri Lanka
Right,
people are really struggling to have that kind of a new open to new ideas to change and obviously there's so much to be changed, I guess.
right.
What I tell me, like when you look back from here, especially
Yeah.
and look at the Sri Lankan community, and also especially maybe female community in Muslim community, or even in general,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think about the nowadays growing up in Sri Lanka?
So I'm going to come back to your word that you use, a balance. I was thinking, it would be very easy for people in Sri Lanka, for the young people to get into social media and look at everything and say, this is, that individualism and independence is like the goal in their lives. What I would like to see is, yes, that part of it should be a goal in your life, but don't give up your connections, don't give up your roots, because I think human beings need to a sense of being connected to people. And as a mental health counselor here, I've seen the consequences of people who get very, very isolated, and what at what cost. So that's what I hope it's not going into in a direction where you sort of just, you think that independence and individuality is the biggest sort of, that should be the main goal. It should be part of a goal. But if you can do that while also keeping your connections and staying, that's what I would like to see.
Good, good. So, Yasmin, I want to wish you all the best, especially
Thank
on
you.
when you're sharing your story with this group, the Voices. And I'm sure it probably is going to be your story, but maybe a lot of people could relate to this kind of stories. As we all know, we all have our own stories as immigrants, and there's
Right.
so much
Yes.
history and so much,
Right.
yeah, I guess. So, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
Uh, No, I think I've said most of
Good.
what I want to say,
Okay.
but thank you. I want to thank you, Chitral, and thank you, Radio Lanka, for this opportunity.
Welcome and good to have you. And I wish you all the best. And
Thank
so,
you.
okay,
Okay.
I'll say
Thank you.
goodbye to you. Okay, then.
Okay.
Thank you.
All
Yeah.
right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.